Hi, I'm Webne Behrman. I have the privilege of serving as a mediator and as someone who facilitates many different kinds of work groups and organizations and teaching people about how to deal with conflict. The opportunity I have with you today is to teach you about dealing with conflict effectively in work teams. The hope is that as we develop more opportunities for people to work collaboratively with one another across many disciplines, that they will develop some skills and strategies for being able to really produce results that are much greater because they are working together. But one of the things that inevitably arises in that kind of collaborative work is that people do get into conflicts with one another. And they need some skills, some strategies to be able to respond to those conflicts as they arise. And I hope that we can identify a few of those in this brief conversation. The whole process of dealing with conflict is not one where we're dealing with bad people who are trying to be difficult. It's one where good people are seeking really positive results, but they have various styles and approaches and personalities that come into play. So if we keep that in mind, we should take a deep breath, realize that the people who are involved are really trying their best, and that we're going to try our best to try to help them, as well as ourselves, deal with our differences together. So when people are dealing with conflict, one of the things that happens is that they're surprised. So I'd like you to just reflect for a moment. When do conflicts arise in work teams in which you are involved? And if you're with a group of people watching this, you can even pause the presentation for a moment and reflect on that. When do they arise? What types of situations really get us stuck? What are the important conflicts that we face in our work together? And what works? When we have experiences, what do we find is really effective? And what gets in the way of what we might know otherwise would really work? If you think about those things and even perhaps reflect on a specific conflict that you are aware of, then that will help our conversation be more realistic and specific and give you some strategies for being able to deal with that situation. So the first thing that happens is that all of a sudden there's a conflict that's come up in our work team, and it's a surprise to us. So for example, let's say that we're all members of an innovation project design team, and we have 3 months to be able to do it, and we got together the first time, and now in the second meeting, Mike, who has a lot of experience with these teams, has decided that this is the way we should be approaching it. Well, Naomi has worked with Mike before, and she knows that Mike can be pretty stubborn and that he kind of stifles creativity in the way he approaches things. So she brings up, wait a second, Mike, we don't need to be just taking this path. Can't we get some more ideas from other members of the group first? Well, Mike is feeling personally attacked in that situation. He says, I have some really good ideas here, Naomi. I know what's going on. Well, Julie's another member of the group, and she just really doesn't like conflict at all. And her feeling is, can't we smooth things out? Can't we make things just better so everybody could get along? And she even says, I'm willing to do more if that's what's required. I just don't want people to be getting into a disagreement. We all have good people on this team. And other people are just dumbfounded and amazed that this conflict's even arisen. So the surprise is the first thing that happens. Well, when that surprise occurs, we need to think about just what a conflict is. A conflict is a disagreement, but it's a disagreement in which the people involved perceive a threat to their needs, interests, or concerns. Now, think about that for a moment. It's a disagreement in which some need is threatened. What kind of need? Well, it might be around the stuff, the substance that we're dealing with. We're trying to produce this project. It might be around our relationships and how we deal with one another and how we communicate with each other. But it might also be about who we are, our identity, some symbolic, deeper meaning that we framed in terms of our personal identity. That might sound kind of complicated, but think about it for a moment. Very often, the most meaningful things that happen in conflicts aren't about the substance. They're about how we feel personally if we're threatened by the differences that exist in the group. It might be perfectly normal for Mike, Naomi, Julie, the other members of the work team to have these disagreements. We need some space in which we can slow down, center ourselves, and start to think about what we really want from a conversation that might address the conflict. So step one is clarify what those needs are. What's going on? What do I want to result if I'm going to try to talk this through? It might also be important to think, what are my alternatives if we don't? And people very quickly go 0 to 60 thinking about those. I'm going to get off this team. I'm going to get on another team. Or I'm going to bully my way into getting what I need. They go there rather than patiently thinking it through. We need to have a space that's relatively safe for negotiating if we're going to have a negotiation. So that's the second step. How do we establish a safe space for negotiation? Very often the foundation for such a space is what we call ground rules. Now, these ground rules or guidelines exist in normal conversation, but they often go out the window in conflict. One person speaks at a time. We'll try to listen to each other with respect. We won't interrupt each other. Those kinds of things, if we can say to each other, how do we want to talk about it? That can open up the channels for then being able to do so. As we begin to discuss the issues, it's critical that each of us individually takes a listening stance into the interaction. That's the third step. Now, I can be waiting for you to do that because I'm right and you're wrong. But instead, if I make it my first order of business to really listen to what you're going to say and discipline myself to do that, that turns out to be extremely powerful in opening up the channels for others because it models for other people the kind of listening that they'd like from each other. So if you take the lead on that and take a listening stance and just breathe deeply, put your hands together, cross your legs, whatever it is that helps you get centered, and then ask other people, can we try to talk about this and make a personal commitment? I'm going to really try to listen to what you have to say. That's a powerful thing to do in the group. Now, it might be pretty hard for Mike and Naomi to do that at this point because they are really entrenched in their positions on the conflict. It might also be difficult for Julie because she's overwhelmed by what's in front of her. That's where other members of their work team become so critical. They may, in terms of the substance, seem to have less of a stake in who's right, who's wrong, and what we should do. But in terms of the overall process and the relationships, they are the best positioned members of the group to take that kind of lead. So if you model it, it will open up the channels for others. So next step then, take a listening stance into the interaction. Along with that, you need to assert what your needs are as clearly and specifically as possible. So if you're playing a facilitative role as a member of the team, you might ask Mike and Naomi, what is it that you need in this situation? Now, they're probably going to respond by saying, well, in Mike's case, well, I think we should be following this process, A, B, and C, and that this is the project that we should be working on. If you're looking at Naomi, she's probably saying, this is too tight, it's too rigid, we need to consider some other ideas. Well, each one of them is taking what we call in conflict a position. Now, a position is being held to because it's what I think is right. But if Mike is over here and Naomi is over here, well, those positions are just two of the possible responses. Why is Mike saying we should follow this procedure? Why is Naomi saying we should open ourselves up to other options? Those answers to why reflect their deeper needs, interests, and concerns, and those are the basis on which we might really respond to the conflict. Remember what a conflict is. It's a disagreement in which we perceive threats to those needs, interests, and concerns. So in that fourth step about asserting your needs as specifically and respectfully as possible, you need to try to shift people from just identifying their positions into focusing on those underlying interests. Now, if they can do that, and if you can help surface the overall concerns that exist in the group, we're probably going to find that there's a fair degree of common ground among the members of the group about what it is we're trying to accomplish. So imagine, for example, in this project team, what might be some of their interests? Well, in terms of substance, they want to design a really innovative project. That's true whether you're Mike, Naomi, Julie, or anyone else. What's another one? Well, they want to do it as effectively as possible within the time frame and resources they've been given. They know they have 3 months. They know they have only so many sessions. They may have a budget for dealing with it. Those are things people are likely to agree on. In terms of process, people probably want to do so in a way that feels inclusive, collaborative, participatory, where you get listened to. Very often people withdraw from groups because it's their sense that their ideas aren't being heard. It's not the idea, it's the process. So how do we create a process in which that can occur? And then psychologically or in terms of the identity, how do people feel in terms of who they are and what matters for them. If you're a senior member of the group, this may be a really big deal. You have a lot invested in this. This may be a capstone experience for you. If you're a more junior member of the group, you're looking to learn, how do we do this? But I want to do it without looking like a fool. Some people are looking at it as a resume builder. Some people are looking at it as simply because they think this is something that's really useful and important. Being able to surface these different concerns will help us realize where they dovetail, and then we can start building solutions that respond to those concerns. So at this point, we get to the fifth step. Now we're going to work on dealing with the issues, problem solving. And this is where I find most people involved in these teams are really good. People are generally pretty good problem solvers. They've learned a lot of great strategies over the years. Take one issue at a time, break it down to a biteable bite. Start with a common concern, but most importantly, generate several possible responses and understand, why are these responses evaluated by different members of the group as good, bad, or otherwise? So examples of criteria might be, we're looking at the best possible project. Okay, so we want a great result. Another might be, I have lots of other things going on. I need to be able to do this in a way that I can manage my other projects. Somebody else really doesn't care about this project. They're just trying to get through the team. Whatever those criteria are, if we can surface them and apply them to the different options that get generated, then we're much more likely to come up with a durable, long-lasting, effective solution that addresses the true issues of the conflict. Now, one of the things that we should anticipate in trying to negotiate through a conflict is that people will get stuck. This place of stuckness is called impasse. And generally, because it feels so terrible, people want to avoid impasse as much as possible. So what I'm going to say to you right now is really paradoxical. Only by going through impasse do we have opportunities for meaningful, durable responses to the conflict. If we don't experience the impasse, we are much less likely to experience truly meaningful solutions. We do what some mediators call dancing around the tough issues, where because we're trying to be civil and because so many of us would rather not be in conflict at all, we just come up with solutions that are nice, civil, easy to get at, aren't going to hurt each other's feelings. But in the process, we might not get at some of the deeper issues that are there. So in this situation, in this work team, Mike and Julie have worked before. They've experienced some kinds of issues together. Some of them may be constructive, some of them may have been destructive. Only by being able to surface them and actually being stuck do we then get at what we really need to have as meaningful, long-lasting solutions. So impasse is not bad. Impasse is a place of stuckness that might well be the portal to an effective response. When you confront that kind of stuckness, there are a couple of things you can do. First of all, it's important to just say, looks like we're stuck right now. How does that feel? This is how it feels for me. And if people can identify those feelings, one of the things that often happens is they all agree, this stinks. We don't want to be here. Good question can then be, what's going to happen if we can't work this out? Well, the alternatives may not be very good. So even though it might feel really unpleasant to talk things through and try to get at those deeper issues, it might also be something that is relatively cost-effective to do so, because by talking them through, we don't go into those default alternatives, which are really going to be bad. Now, sometimes we find that we need more information when we're stuck. So maybe we need a break. Maybe we are arguing over what the options are and we need to speak with our sponsor, our faculty advisor. Now that can be a tough issue too, because sometimes work teams don't really want to let the sponsor know we're having a conflict. It makes us look bad. Well, only by engaging your sponsor in what's going on in your work team can that person understand where you're getting stuck and maybe provide some information, whether it has to do with budget, deadlines, other resources, that might help free up some new responses that the members of the group didn't think were possible. This relationship between the team and the sponsor is useful throughout the process, but it's especially important in impasse. So if you reach impasse, one of the things that can happen is to also take a structured break to get some more information, where people have some assignment that they can then bring back to the group. And maybe we're stuck right now because we just don't feel like we're being heard and we want to save face in some way that isn't possible right now. So even if the break is 10 minutes, the break can be a useful way for being able to take stock, re-energize, and consider what might we do to get ourselves out of this impasse. Hopefully, as the result of all these conversations, you're generating options, you're dealing with the places of stuckness. And at that point, you're starting to build incremental agreements. As you do so, take stock of those, write them down, or otherwise track them so that everybody in the group knows what we are agreeing to, so that in the end, you have an agreement that really responds to the needs of the conflict and becomes an action plan that people who negotiated the solution can now follow for being able to see how we're doing going forward. Hallmarks of a good agreement are important to keep in mind. First of all, it needs to be fair in the eyes of those who negotiated it. Secondly, it needs to be balanced, that we all have a stake in making it work. Not just Mike, Naomi, Julie, but everyone on the team. Third, it needs to be realistic. We say we're going to do these things, but is it something we have the time, the capacity, the power to do? Fourth, it needs to be as specific as necessary in order to translate into being monitored as an action plan. Another thing that's real important about a good agreement is that it is as self-enforcing as possible. The people who negotiated it are the ones who make it happen. And lastly, a good agreement is future-oriented. It not only responds or reacts to the issues that were raised, but it also says, what are we going to do in the future if we have another issue of conflict? How are we going to deal with it? Now, it might happen within the specific project team, but it might also be informative in those other relationships that transcend the team, because the members of the group are going to be working on other projects in other situations. So keep these hallmarks in mind, because they can be useful for checking at the end, what have we accomplished? Did we accomplish all we needed to? The last thing to keep in mind with a conflict resolution process is that we should build in implementation and assessment. There needs to be some follow-through that occurs simply as a normal course of doing our work. So whether it's 2 days later, a week later, 2 weeks later, we need to be able to return to the points of agreement and say to one another, how are we doing? This kind of checking back as a normal process is critical, rather than waiting for a crisis to arise that then doesn't have a whole lot of goodwill to it. If we can say to each other, yeah, we're doing it, we're following through on the things we said we would do. Or, just as importantly, you said you were going to do this, I don't see any evidence of it. Where's the follow-through? Did something get in the way? Well, that allows people to be able to say, I got too busy, or I got sick, or some surprise happened. Well, then they're able to say to each other, okay, what are we going to do about it now? Maybe it means we revise the agreement. The last thing important about the follow-up is that lots of times in the initial discussion, there are other issues that haven't yet become ripe enough to discuss, and only by working through these initial issues are certain members of the group now ready to say, we didn't talk about this. I'm feeling this way about another issue. And because we were successful with the initial negotiation, we've opened up some channels for these other issues to come forward. So if we keep in mind these 8 steps, we'll find that much of the time as these issues arise in our work teams, that we will have a way of being able to slow down, calmly approach the issue, even though there might be butterflies and anxiety inside, and have a way to talk it through. We think of conflict as a normal process rather than something that's caused by bad people trying to be difficult. If we think of it as that normal process that's going to arise as we try to work collaboratively, then it's a very useful type of learning that we can take not only to our work teams, but to many other parts of our lives. Hope you have found this to be helpful. Please feel free to follow up by contacting me, and I look forward to working with you further on these kinds of issues.